to this computer. Okay, fantastic. So we are good to go. And I think, Bakr, you're starting us off. So whenever you're ready.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, that's actually in the agenda.
Sorry. I thought it's the welcome to country first. Okay.
No, I think we start with the salam and the dua first.
Should I just, I'm going to mute.
Yeah,
Cool.
no.
But it's a...
Okay, can we start, Mihak? Okay, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. All praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salutations to his messenger, Muhammad, peace be upon him. My dear brothers and my dear sisters, we welcome you all to today's program about advocacy and activism in Islam. We have Sheikh Saeed Warsami with us here, who will be introduced after, inshallah. And we have Sister Alicia and Sister Mahak, who will also be running the program. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward all of them. First of all, would like to start by reciting some Quran. And Surah Al-Fatiha is dua and some Quran. So we'll start with that before moving on to the rest of the program, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الرحمن الرحيم. مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. آمين. Ameen. Sadaqallahu al-Azim. May Allah make us of those who are on the right path and guided. Before moving on, I'll leave you with Sister Mihak, inshallah, for the welcome.
Thank you, Bakr, Jazakallah, for starting us off with that. Welcome, everyone. We're really excited to have you join us as three young Muslims in the local community having a conversation with a local imam about advocacy and activism in Islam. Before we begin the formal panel, we would like to acknowledge that this conversation is taking place on the lands of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional custodians, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. An acknowledgement of country is important because Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have suffered significant exclusion from Australian society since colonisation. Also, many non-Indigenous Australians have not had the opportunity to learn about and celebrate the rich cultures of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. This has contributed to the disparity between First Nations and non-Indigenous Australians that persists today. There's also so much smaller population in Australia, and it's upon us to stand in solidarity with their advocacy and activism towards equal and human rights. I'm really actually also wanted to add that today is NAIDOC week, or NAIDOC week starts today. It's the 8th of November, and it's really a moment to recognize what First Nation communities have done over the past years. I also want to make a quick comment about the fact that Islamic communities and Indigenous communities have had long-standing relationships for many, many years, pre-colonization as well. I'd like to now pass it on to Alicia, who will give us a bit of an overview of this panel.
Okay, so we're here today to talk about advocacy and activism through an Islamic lens. So just to quickly define those two terms, because I think they're so often used sort of interchangeably, but there is like a nuance. So I like to think of activism as working from outside of a system and advocacy as from working within it. Activism is often sort of direct action, and advocacy is really strong support. So they both work together, and we need both for change. But there is sort of, I think, a distinction, and I think we're gonna use the term advocacy more. But it, you know, you can interchange, you can be an activist at some point and advocate others. So yeah, and so we hope today we can have this discussion on how we can approach advocacy and activism, specifically as young Muslims, especially given that advocacy is often so very Western influenced. So although Mehek, Bakr, and I all come from different backgrounds, what binds us together is also that we're all advocates for something. So, and we're all passionate about different causes. So let's kind of talk about how we can, Islam can inform and sort of guide us in our advocacy journeys together. So I'm going to hand it over now to Bakr, and he'll give a little introduction.
Let's introduce together Sheikh Saeed Warsami, or Mufti Saeed Warsami. He is obviously first and foremost a relatively very young Imam, so he certainly understands the youth, not only the Muslim youth in general, but he also understands the youth specifically in West Melbourne, where we are, and obviously it applies to the youth elsewhere. He was born in Egypt and raised up in Melbourne, Australia. Before embarking on his religious pursuit of knowledge, he graduated in the top 6% of the state, receiving acceptance into the renowned Melbourne University, where he majored, and I hope I pronounced this right, neuropharmacology and neurochemistry. I'm not good at science, but he also has interests in the fields of history, psychology, philosophy, economics, and political theory. I'm certainly interested in that. Therefore, studying the sacred higher Islamic sciences for over 10 years, mashallah, different scholars around the world and different ijazas that he received in Quran, recitation and fiqh, aqidah, theology and hadith, among others. And he has taught those different texts like Tirmidhi and Mishkatul Masabih. He's also been beautiful teaching our very renowned Sahih al-Bukhari. He has traveled throughout the subcontinent, Africa, UK and North America, giving da'wah, teaching the youth, giving counseling, and he's been an imam of different mosques, I believe even in America. So he's seen the whole world and the Muslim community, and especially the young Muslims around the world. He loves nature and the outdoors, and he is also on the board of directors of Cordoba Academy in Washington and the Al-Ihsan Institute here in Melbourne. He is currently the imam, as we said, and the pastoral care coordinator of Al-Taqwa College in Western Melbourne. He's a senior director and advisor to a number of non-profit and educational institutions with a unique outlook on life. He is an advocate for peace, humanity, integration, and has a pragmatic approach for dealing with issues facing Muslims in the West. And he's done a great job at that, especially in our community. I can personally see him, mashallah, working with the other imams. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward him. So that's about our main guest, Mufti Saeed, and I'll leave the floor with the girls again, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair.
Right, yeah,
We might also just give a quick introduction to the three of us for context. Like I said, my name is Mehek. I live in the western suburbs in Tarneet specifically. My journey of advocacy has started 8 years ago when I moved to Australia, mostly working in local communities and trying to, I suppose, build bridges between communities, particularly like intergenerationally and interculturally and interfaith. So that's kind of my area of interest. I am 24 years old and I don't think I've ever been to any other state other than Victoria, so I'm very passionate about the western suburbs of Melbourne. That's a little bit about me. Alicia?
Sure. My name's Alicia. I'm a designer, I'm a storyteller, and I'm a lifelong immigrant. So I'm really passionate about all things related to immigrants and sort of well-being around immigrants and identity. And really anything related to international development, because I live between India and Melbourne. So that's a little bit about me.
Yep. I'm Bakr. I'm 19 years old, studying international studies, majoring in politics, to be more specific, Middle East politics. And my advocacy and activism first began at the masjid with my father. I live obviously in the western suburbs of Melbourne. I live in Hoppers Crossing. Before I lived in Newport, and my father was the biggest push for me to always, be part of activities at the local masajid and that sort of stuff, and to connect with other masajid. As for politically, I had one teacher at school who, told me I should do politics. And before that, a little anecdote, in year 6, I met the mayor of Hobsons Bay City Council, and I spoke about making the street at the school one way. She had for grade 6, which was something great to have a meeting for the grade 6s from all the local primary schools. And I spoke asking her to make the school street one-way street because there was lots of traffic happening there. And she taught me, she said, you're a very good speaker and you should be a politician. And that rang in my head and it stayed with me. And the street became one way, so that motivated me more. So that's
good.
And yeah, let's, since I started off from there, inshallah, we'll move on to the questions, to interview Sheikh Saeed. Sheikh Saeed, welcome. We welcomed you before. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum again. If we move on straight to the questions, the history of advocacy in Islam, and even all, the prophets, the scholars, Muslim figures. So was advocacy something that's just come up lately in Western literature, or something that we're only learning about recently, or does it have history, specifically Islamic history?
Yes. So, in a manner of speaking, the title of nubuwah, of prophethood, and the title of advocacy and activism is almost, in the Islamic context, it's very synonymous, right? Because in the sense that every prophet came to do something. It's part of a story. And as the Prophet ﷺ describes, he says that, have you seen a building and there is a brick that is missing in this building? And you're saying, this is a lovely building, but it's missing a very important part in this certain brick. And he said, this is me. I am that brick. So that story of the Prophet ﷺ and the story of the Anbiya, of the prophets that came before, each and every single one of them added a certain beauty to this world. Just not only in activism, but in all senses, to the extent that, Ibn Kathir in his Qasas al-Nabiyyin, he writes something that's very interesting. He says that, Idris alayhi salam was the first one to use the pen. So the pen, the invention of the pen, right, which is, and interestingly, he was in Egypt. So papyrus, pen, hieroglyphs, you can put the whole thing together, right? So, he was in Egypt, and the first one to mine, right, was Dawood alayhi salatu wasalam, to really bring metals and goods from the earth. And this was taught to Dawood alayhi salam. And this is part of the meaning in the ayah, وَأَلَنَّا لَهُ الْحَدِيدِ. So there's so many innovations, even with Sulaiman alayhi salam and flying and all of these things. So there's a lot of things that happen with the prophethood on the side. So the prophethood itself, the office of the prophethood is activism, because the meaning of activism is to make the world better. We can be better. So that's what every Nabi came. No, we can be better. So with Hud, the people of Hud, Salih, the people of Salih, and they were fantastic people. They had great technology. They had fantastic, craftsmanship, but they lacked this aspect of their lives. They were too haughty, right? They almost their destruction was their own good. It's sort of like the story of Icarus and him flying too far up. So that you always need someone to ground you. And so the Prophet ﷺ, even our Prophet ﷺ, in his time, he comes in a time when, to step on someone's rights was very normal, right? It became normal, to the extent that the people in Mecca, they formed a group among some wealthy, conscientious group of people called Hilful Fudul. And I'm going to finish with this. And this Hilful Fudul, they were a group of, they weren't Muslim, they were before the time of the Prophet ﷺ, they were conscientious people from the upper classes mostly. And they were extremely conscientious about how the upper classes treated the other classes that existed in the different stratas and socioeconomic statuses that existed at that time. And so what was very common, because Mecca was a center, it was a bustling, place where people were coming because of the Kaaba, right? And so Arab tribes and people who weren't Arab as well were coming to Mecca because of this spirituality, right? Because you have to understand, this is the time of spirituality in the world, right? A lot of the traditions that exist today in the world, spiritual traditions exist around the world, pranayama and all of these other things that exist throughout the world. It's around that time, right? About 2,000 years, if you count them all, it's around that time. So, right, if at that time, so Mecca was a bustling place, but because the people of Mecca were this very smart group of people, you have to understand, the Quraysh were talented people, okay? And that is why the Prophet ﷺ mentioned at one time that if the position of Amir is to come, it should come from Quraysh. And if the position of Wazir is to come, it should come from Medina. Why? Because the Medina people, the Medinites, they were fantastic micromanagers. And the people from Mecca were great macromanagers, right? They knew how, they were visionaries, right? They were the type of people to organize, they were trailblazers. Abu Sufyan is going to sit with like the Caesar, right? He goes and sits with Caesar and has conversations with him. These guys were something else. So the Hilful Fudul was a group of people who were very conscientious about how the people, and the Prophet ﷺ said that if I was there at that time with them, then I would also be with them as well. Because this is the beauty about Islam, and Islam comes to do the right thing, even if it means that the society doesn't necessarily like it at that time, right? If we look at, the civil rights movement, you look at, change, this is the past 100 years, the amazing level of change that has happened throughout the world, through the rise of liberalism and realism and all of these other, isms that have happened. It came through challenging society and saying, hold on, this is not right. Even here, and I'll conclude with this. Even here in Australia, most of our rights we didn't just get it, by the way, right? Even the Victorian Charter of Human Rights, they didn't just come by the way. They came when someone said, hold on, guys, there's something wrong here. You need to do this.
100%. Nothing just comes randomly.
It sounds
It has to be effective.
totally, subhanAllah, it sounds like Islam, was made with all of these guidelines for advocacy right from the beginning. It's not this new theories that we're learning about, through Instagram or, politics studies. None of that. It's been embedded is what it sounds like. So I'd like to ask you a follow-up question is, how can Islam and its teachings guide us to be better advocates for justice? Because it sounds like it's embedded. And if you, in your answer, could you also maybe share what are some qualities of a Muslim advocate or a Muslim activist when they're on their journey?
Right. So there's a lot of things about being an activist that are, in a sense, you're going against the grain. Okay. You're going against the grain. You're going against, the mainstream views. Okay. Because you're out there, you're trying to bring good, positive change in a positive way. Right. So having said that, Islam recognizes that there is a burden on the activist. There's a burden, right? There's a burden, right? It takes something out of you, okay? Right? And it takes something out of you. There's a reason why, CEOs and presidents, when they get into that position, they come out with white hair, right? I don't know if you guys remember, but I was very young at the time as well, when, Obama was being elected, and we liked this guy because he had less gray hair and white hair, right? By the time he left, right, he had as much white hair as any other, president, right? And the reason is because the job takes a lot out of you, even though he's relatively young in the scheme of things, right? I mean, he's only really reached 50 something just now. So in the scheme of things, he's relatively young, but, in the wider picture, it takes something out of you. It takes something out of being a CEO, being an activist even. So Islam recognizes that there has to be certain inner qualities that build your life. So subhanallah, there is really two surahs, that one after the other in the Quran, and Allah put which one comes first? The Ya Ayyuhal Muzammil, right? And the one that comes after that, Ya Ayyuhal Muddathir. If you look at Ya Ayyuhal Muddathir, it's a very activist orientated surah. Ya Ayyuhal Muddathir, Qum fa'andir, stand and warn the people. Qum fa'andir, wa rabbaka fakabbir, right? And declare the greatness of your Allah. Wa thiyabaka fatahir, and look after how your clothes are. So there's a message there for activism, but there's this backstory of what really spawns the activism, and that is in Surah Muzammil. Ya ayyuhal muzammil, qum al-layla illa qalila. نصفه أو انقص منه قليلا أو زد عليه ورتل القرآن ترتيلا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that, oh you, Ya ayyuhal muzammil, muzammil, mudaththir, these are beautiful titles from the lover to the beloved, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and vice versa. That there is this conversation that is happening, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that, oh you muzammil, who's wrapped up in a cloth at night. Okay, it's how you clothe yourself at night. And he's standing, قُمِ اللَّيْلَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا, stand even for a small portion of the night. قُمِ اللَّيْلَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا, نِصْفَهُ, half the night, أَوْ انْقُصْ مِنْهُ قَلِيلًا, or even less than that. وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ, and read the Quran. So what there has to be, you see guys, the human body is a rider and a horse. So there has to be a spiritual aspect to that person. So there has to be this spiritual aspect to you. There has to be, and subhanAllah, just this point alone, I can go on for the next 3 or 4 hours. But just to sum it up, there has to be a spiritual aspect to you. You have to have this spiritual power. right? And there needs to be this connection strong, because the source energy, that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you're taking your source energy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that grants you that ability. Now, everyone knows the story about Umar bin Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu, you know, doing this and, you know, being so active, and, you know, him being such a in-your-face type person. But very rarely you would hear about the stories of Umar radiallahu anhu crying and crying and crying at nighttime. Everyone knows the story about Uthman radiallahu anhu giving so much sadaqah, but did you know that his cheeks were lined with tears? They actually physically got lined because he was crying so much. So an activist's life really starts between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they have to have this. First, you turn towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have these spiritual practices. And I can go into sound and sound energy, and when you make dhikr, how it changes you, right? And I'll give you just one example. There's this, you know, there's this one chemical, I forgot the name of it. I think it's lucitol. I forgot what it was. I will get that name of that chemical for you. And this chemical does a certain thing in the body. Now, what they did was they took the resonance, right? The sound resonance of that chemical structure, and they just put it on top of water. They played that resonance on water. When the person drank that water, the same reaction that they have with taking that pill they had with water, H2O. But because that water was moving on the resonance, and as you know, there's certain resonances. So as we know, in an Islamic sense, when you make dhikr, when you read the Quran, there's this resonance that your body is going through, and it is purifying you and protecting you on a spiritual level. So there needs to be a spiritual quality. Another thing which is very important is that an activist has to be a very intuitive person. This is very hard. You can't take a degree for this intuition. You can't, you're not going to learn it anyway. What does intuition mean? In the Islamic sense, in the Arabic sense, we say that the Prophet ﷺ said, اتقوا من فراسة المؤمن فإنه ينظر بنور الله. What does that mean? It means that there is a certain aspect of expectation. It's almost like you see it coming before it happens. There has to be a certain aspect of intuition. So this intuition, this firasa, and there is, mashallah, you know, Bakr really, I tell you, Bakr got me into the whole Sultan Abdul Hamid thing. It's his fault, but now, mashallah, I'm a big fan of Sultan Abdul Hamid, and you know that show is just, it's really great. Yeah, and so there's this one scene where someone is telling him something about a plan that they wanted to do, and he's like, no, hold on, that's not what you want to do. You want to do this, and this is what you want to do in 30 years. How did that come? That came with a certain level of intuition. And so for an activist, my advice is you have to have a mentor. You have to have a mentor. You have to have someone that you have to go back to, okay? You know, and that's what I love about, you know, the greatest of activists always had a mentor. They have to have always someone that mentors you. And honestly, if I was to give my advice, you know, whatever age I'm at the moment, and I was to give it to someone that was considerably younger, someone that just left school, for instance, right? They would be starting at where I left off. Right? And I've been blessed with that. You know, I enjoyed, you know, one of the teachers I met, I was somewhere in Bangladesh, and this guy was like 112 years old, right? He was on his bed, you know, and we stayed with him for like half a day, but I'm like, and he's like, you know, you got to continue, you know, doing, you know, all these great things. And I was just like, I'm just honored to meet you. But that's the beauty. You meet someone that's 112 years old, you know, you're starting from where they left, you know, in a manner of speaking. So it's great to have a mentor. And I think that will be something that will be, especially on you know, on all levels, you know, on the academic level, on the spiritual level, on the activism level, you need to have someone that you refer to.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I do have one follow-up question before I pass it on to the others. We understand that in activism and advocacy, there are many opinions and there are many perspectives that people bring. And I guess the question I have is, how do we encourage people to have diverse opinions, but still be respectful of each other? Because at the moment, we see a lot of polarization in whether it's politics or history or conversations. But it really, at the end of the day, it's about creating a better world together. So I'd love to hear some advice about how we have respectful but diverse conversations.
Yeah, you know, mashallah, you know, there's such a beautiful and diverse history, especially in terms of people in the Islamic tradition. And mashallah, like there's millions of, you know, people throughout history that have said different things. One of the important points that is mentioned by Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, and Imam Abu Hanifa, at least in the fiqh sense, is one of the most influential people, albeit in some places of the world people find it slightly controversial, but his fiqh, no one can deny his intelligence in fiqh, right? Imam Malik said that, like, you see this umud that is in front of you, and it's this pole or whatever, this pillar that is in front of you, and that pillar was from wood. He said, if Imam Abu Hanifa wanted, he will convince you that it's gold. Like, that is, his level of intelligence and his argumentation and his ability to bring proofs was at a high level. But how did that develop? Imam Abu Hanifa used to say that even if you need to sit with someone who is, crazy, which means that someone that you and might not even think is sane enough to get advice from, right? There's plenty of people around us, so you're just like, oh man, that uncle is cooked up, or you say this person's like, oh my God, I don't know what they're talking about. All they talk is just other stuff. But you can grab hikmah. So one of the great, traditions from the Prophet ﷺ is that the al-hikmatu dalatul mu'min, that the hikmah, wisdom, is a lost item of a mu'min, and you have to give it, and you go and find it wherever you can. And subhanAllah, sometimes you even find it, and many of times, not just sometimes, many a times you will find it from someone who's not of the Islamic tradition, but they're from somewhere else. And I would always advise towards diversity and making yourself diverse and meeting so many diverse. This is an advice of the Prophet ﷺ. Used to say, that you should go and spend time with those people who are not from your background, and you learn so much. I love being in a country where, or somewhere where I cannot speak the language of the people. And you have to go out there and you just have to figure out, understand through sign language, because, they say 60% of human communication is nonverbal. Yeah, go try that. Let's see how you go with it. And then you go and, you sit there and you're trying to figure out. And that's how people ask me how I learned Hindi or Urdu or whatever. That's how I figured it out, because I was put into positions where I couldn't figure, I was okay, I have to go and, communicate. And there's beauty in that.
I think that we had a question about advocacy as part of Islam or non-Western lens, but I think we did go through that a while in the first question. If you have anything to add onto that point, otherwise we can move on to another point. But,
even Sheikh Jazairi, rahimahullah, who there is a village, right, or a town or somewhere in, I think it's in Kentucky. It's called Qaeda, right? Because, people were so fascinated with Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi, rahimahullah, that they were just people, non-Muslims, people like a normal, everyday American would just be like, wow, this guy is going to call this town Qaeda, because this guy spent so long, right? Struggling against, the French. But despite that, when he was in exile in Damascus and he found, a Muslim majority city oppressing some minorities in the city who weren't Muslims, he was the first one to go there and say, no, we can't do this, guys. This is not right. And he protected their rights, and he was known for that. And so that got him a lot of honor around the world. So I think he's also another example of, activism in a positive sense. I lived in South Africa for almost a decade. And I can tell you that, Nelson Mandela, he said something very interesting, in his speech that, sad to say was the result in a positive sense as well. There's always silver lining on the cloud that, resulted in him going to, the court case that resulted in him going to jail for so long. But he said that in his lifetime, he fought against black racism and he fought against white racism, not just white. He fought against white and black racism. So he's fought against it on both sides. So the person has to have that tradition as well.
So 100%.
Just passing to Alicia.
Yeah, sure. I'm just unmuting myself. So we know as advocates and activists, we're often really, really passionate. We're super passionate. And I think that's maybe also a part of that intuition that you spoke about, is we're very sort of also fiery sort of people sometimes. So what are some of the dangers or red flags that we need to be aware of when we're deeply involved in advocacy, especially when we're involved in advocacy in non-West or non-sort of Islamic, or rather in more Western contexts?
Right. So there's a lot of pitfalls. There's a lot of pitfalls, as in anything, mashallah. Even, to study to become an imam, there's a lot of pitfalls, right? But you survive them and you progress through them in a congruent fashion by having a mentor. And so one of the most dangerous aspects of advocacy is that you get to see the faults of people. It becomes, because you're poking people there, right? That's what you're doing. You're taking people out of their comfort zone, and people are not going to like that. They're going to say something that they don't like. And so that is going to be a wake-up call for a lot of people. And so there's a sense that you've got to be, you've got to wake up to yourself over here that, okay, look, it's not just about the fault. The people are good, right? You got to see the good in everyone. And I think that needs to be balanced. And people say, oh, but that's so difficult. How am I meant to correct people and see the good in them? Well, that's why the dunya is a test, okay? That's why this dunya is a test, because it's not easy. It's not meant to be easy. There needs to be this active consciousness. But if a person develops consciousness and you're harder, you're a person who's there and is very conscious about what's going on. In Islam, we have that sense of being ghafil. We say a person who has ghafla. And what is ghafla is when the heart is not mindful. Right. So now they've only discovered this mindfulness. And I always say this, right? Science and thought is always catching up with religion and spirituality. They're always catching up, right? It's not the opposite way around. And I say that because there's a lot of things that, you turn around and you just say, they're just doing research on this now, right? And just figuring out things. How is that possible? Because, even for example, the bacteria, the microbiome, right? The microbiome, right? The gut and how important it is, and the skin's, everything's got its own, the eye's got its own microbiome, the skin's got its own microbiome, the ear's got its own, not just the gut. So we are not just, ourselves, but we are with all these other creatures. So having said that from an Islamic sense, we have to be very mindful of focusing on the faults of others without first understanding and making excuses for other people. So we're correcting them, because look at the Prophet ﷺ, and I'll conclude with this, that look at the Prophet ﷺ, how he dealt with the people of Taif. And he was pelted. He was, blood was coming down of the Prophet ﷺ. And, he was taking the blood and he was making sure it doesn't drop, because the blood of a prophet to drop is a big thing. It causes things to happen. And so the Prophet ﷺ was very mindful, and he said, no, from their descendants, there will come people, inshallah ta'ala. So he was happy. He understood that sometimes change doesn't happen in one generation. It takes time so you might get somewhere with the people that come after you will get somewhere else. And so this is the nature of trailblazers and people who are entrepreneurial and also advocates as well, and activists.
True, Sheikh, Jazakumullah khairan. And subhanAllah, the people of Taif towards the end of the Prophet's life, I'm pretty sure they came to Islam towards the end of the Prophet's life. So he saw the fruits, alhamdulillah. There's a gap sometimes between young Muslim people or activists, advocates who are young with the leadership, especially let's talk about the Muslim community. So how can we work together to resolve this?
Yeah, look, I think, if an advocate is very diligent and very serious about the work that they're doing, inshallah ta'ala, the results would speak for itself, and it will grab the attention of the right people. And it takes time sometimes. It can't happen overnight. But to be honest, it's the responsibility of the Muslim leadership to be in touch with all facets of their community. And this is something that makes the most successful leader, the leader that is in touch and who is relevant to his time, right? It doesn't necessarily mean age, because sometimes you think, is it the person's age that is holding them back? And I said, no way, because I've had teachers who are above 70, above 80, but what they talk about is so relevant today. right? So a person has to be up to date in regards to, so best thing for the activist is to try and, deliver the message, as the Prophet ﷺ said, that you have anzilu nasa manazilahum, and this is a hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, that treat everyone according to their levels. So the leadership, it's a Muslim leader. You can't just go and hang out with him at village cinemas. There needs to be a way of approaching him. There needs to be there's a decorum, and there's doors to know. So this is part of being an activist. So this is the duty of the activist as well. So for one side, it is the duty of a Muslim leader to be in touch with all facets of their community, but people get so boxed up in what they're doing. You see, what happens is that as a leader, you've got a certain domain, and you've got a certain group of people who listen to you, who pay attention to you. And so as they're paying attention to you, they're listening to you, then at the same time you get all of these things where, okay, fine, you have that thing, but at the same time you've got to go out of your comfort zone. So for an activist as well, sometimes you can't come in on your chariot and take over the city. You've got to also know how to be the beggar as well, and that's part of being an activist. That you also have to sometimes step down from your horse, and perhaps I'm not saying this is the case with our leadership, but I will just mention something by the way. And it's not really relevant. I don't see it relevant to anyone in this time, but it's more relevant in the corporate world, because I also worked at Telstra for a little while. So I can tell you it's relevant in the corporate world. Sometimes you do have to massage someone's ego, okay? But I wouldn't do it so regularly, because then it's being counterproductive. So there's different ways of getting in touch with people, whether they're royalty, whether they're not royalty. There's ways of grabbing people's attention. But you just have to know how to do it in the most positive sense. And I recommend that for any activist.
صح Sheikh, 100%. And there's a saying in Arabic, تمسكن حتى تتمكن.
Yes, تمسكن حتى تتمكن. Yes.
So you are able to do something. We'll get to the next question with Mihak.
Thank you, Bakr, and thank you, Sheikh. You've talked us, or you've taken us on a journey of activism and advocacy taking very many forms, from like civil rights protests to historical references as well. So I'm kind of curious to hear that even though we know advocacy takes many forms, we still don't perhaps see as many people, standing up and getting involved in causes that might be relevant to them or their local communities. So my question is, how can we encourage young people, and people generally, maybe not just young, to utilize their existing skills, their existing interests to be better advocates, and I suppose create sort of that interest that there is a role to play?
Yeah, look, if change doesn't happen from everyone, the change is going to be limited. And so the more people that it happens, the more people say, look, now this needs to change, man. The more people that say, okay, like this is not good, or we need to, sometimes it's not change. Sometimes it's about keeping a certain quality that we have going, right? So it's not always change. Sometimes it's preservation, right? Preserving, the beautiful constitution that we have, constitutional rights that we have. And sometimes it's about preserving, the status quo. So there's a way of doing that. Now, for instance, a person can also have, just on a, on a side note, that you can mention to them that if they don't get active now, they will reap, unfortunately, the consequences of not being active at that time. And I'll give you an example. This example comes from Nazi Germany, right? And the example is of a very famous person in Nazi Germany. And he said they came for the Negro, and I said nothing. And they came for the Jew, and I said nothing. He said they came for the gypsy, and I said nothing. He said they came for the homosexual, and I said nothing. He said they came for the man down the road, and I said nothing. They came for my neighbor, and I said nothing. And he said, when they came for me, there was no one left to say anything. So just remember that if you're going to, whatever's happening on any side of the world, right? If you don't feel that you're part of it, right? Because the human beings, we might not think we're family, but we're all family. right? From the whitest of us to the darkest of us, right? To whatever. We are all family, right? Whether we're in the South Pacific, and we're realizing this now. And governments are realizing it, thankfully. And they're realizing they need to be more multilateral, right? They need to be more cooperative. They need to start building regional institutions and global institutions and internationalism, right? That's one of, at the moment we've got the Biden-Trump election that's going on. That's one of the selling cards, main points of Joseph Biden, that Joe is, he is an old school liberal internationalist, right? He's an old school liberal internationalist, right? In that sense, right? So coming back to the point that if they don't remember that they're going to reap the consequences, right? All the rewards, they will reap the rewards for sure, but they will also reap the consequences if they don't go out and make a change.
Thank
So you
you.
have, it's an active thing. The Prophet ﷺ said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that al-khalqu iyalullah, that the creation, they're all the family of Allah. So for instance, if we don't care about animal rights, it will affect us. We might not think it doesn't affect us, but it will affect us because we're all in this ecosystem together here in this world together, and we all need to work together.
And that's exactly how I actually think about the world. It's very hard for me not to see it in a systematic way, this ecosystem analogy really, I think, is something that resonates with me in my advocacy a lot, where I feel like, something like the Black Lives Matter movement that's been happening, is not maybe directly related to me, but I am a cog in the system. And, my conversations with my Black brothers and sisters makes a difference to this larger piece. So, yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'm just going to pass it on to Alicia. A different kind of advocacy approach.
Yeah. I actually, just before that, I have a bit of a follow-up question on that last bit. Was just sort of, do you think it is framed as a yes or no question, but it doesn't have to be. But do you think that sort of? So I grew up going to mosques for sort of Islamic Sunday school or whatever. So do you think these kinds of things when we're younger have spaces specifically for Muslims, by Muslims, have room for sort of instilling a sort of responsibility in us as young Muslims? And could you sort of talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So your question, if I was to just get it correct, is that the Sunday schools, Saturday schools, the mosques, how do they fit into the picture of active? Right. Yeah. So the masjid is the center of a mu'min's life, right? It is the place where, it's the place where we hang out, right? Because we're there for Fajr, we're there for Dhuhr, we're there for Asr, we're there for Maghrib, we're there for Isha, we're there again. If we're not there 5 times a day, we're there twice a day, we're there once a day. And this was even in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, right? So there was 2 brothers that said that, okay, one brother was sitting with the Prophet ﷺ, learning the whole day, just listening to him. The other brother was in the business, right? And it's to the extent that he came and he complained to the Prophet ﷺ. He said that I'm working so hard. He's always with you, O Prophet of Allah, that, and I'm supporting him. Why doesn't he come? And the Prophet ﷺ says, لَعَلَّكَ تُرْزَقَ بِهِ. Maybe you're getting your rizq, your sustenance from him. Maybe you think you're supporting him, but maybe he's supporting you. So there is a certain khair and goodness that is there in the mosque, and the mosque resonates. Like I said, you either reap the rewards or the consequences, and sometimes both. So when there's someone in the masjid and they're doing these spiritual acts that has, mashallah, a beautiful aspect of spirituality in it. And I've experienced it. I've experienced it in countries where the adhan is said out aloud, and you just feel like there's a different thing that is happening. And so what I would suggest is, if everyone has a spiritual relationship with not only just the masjid, but it's the people of the mosque. So it could be your imam, it could be your Quran teacher, it could be whatever, because they're giving out spirituality and they're giving out, gifts of knowledge that spark. It could be just someone just listens to something and it gives you a spark. There's a reason why Ibn al-Haytham, Jazari, Fatima Astrolabi, and so many of the other great scientists and inventors and engineers of the Muslim world, almost 1,000. Imagine 1,000 years ago, he made a thing called the camera obscura, right? How was that possible? There were this, and in his life, Ibn al-Haytham used to be a person who read the Quran regularly. There's something happening with you when you do these things, and it just inspires you to do so much good. But I would also inculcate this, that it's important for it to be delivered in a proper fashion, right? And what is known about Quran teachers that is that they're just sitting down with a stick, right? In some places in the world, they're just sitting down with a stick, right? And so this is not, this is not how it's meant to be. Like sometimes we misunderstand, and I actually try myself. I try myself when I teach Quran, alhamdulillah, and I do teach Quran to some kids, right? And I make sure that there is none of that, right? There's a way of teaching kids, that's very positive. So I think it's very important that we all realize that there is beauty in these things, and it can spark activism on many levels.
Thank you for that. That was very good. And so just sort of on a different note, I'm a designer and I'm an artist. So I've often seen sort of Muslim artists and designers, especially with sort of social media coming up. I've seen a lot of them getting more involved with activism. And I've also seen unfortunately, read a lot of comment sections where they face a lot of backlash and criticism for being un-Islamic or whatever, because traditionally, like, drawing is incongruent with Islam or Islamic teachings. So, and I've also seen a lot of sort of artists be able to reach out to a base that other people can't. So, for example, Muslims who sort of are able to, through their illustrations, share a lot of experiences and about being Muslim in a non-Muslim country, which reach a lot of non-Muslim people, which is really hard to do for other people. So what are your sort of thoughts on that?
That's a very important point. And art, one of the hardest things I have had to go through in this pandemic is not being able to visit the National Gallery of Victoria, not being able to, go to the museums and, appreciate art. I love art. Art is just part of, I used to have, subhanAllah, one of my teachers, I had a couple of teachers who taught me Bukhari, and one of my teachers for Bukhari, his wife was a fantastic artist. And I used to just be known for just buying her artwork. It was fantastic. So I think art is important for society in order to get people to understand, conceptualize bigger things and become deep thinkers. It's very important. It's always been there in the Islamic world. And art, we didn't just build homes and mosques. We built art. Right, we built in art. If you look at, even if you look at, in Delhi, the Lal Killa, just talking about places that I've been to, the Lal Killa, you have that mosque in Dhaka. What's it called? Really beautiful. Just looks like the Kaaba or something. I forgot the name of it. It's really big and it's beautiful. If you look at even, you go and look at, I'm just talking in a traditional sense. You go to look at, different places in the Muslim world, even the masjid I've got behind me, right? And, many other places around in the Muslim world, you would see Taj Mahal, you would see art in it, right? There's always art in it. So art was always there. It's just, the question is, look, there's always a difference. Even dogs, for instance, in the Islamic tradition, people would think that, dogs are haram, totally. And the real truth is, there's a difference of opinion there. And so I'm just saying that because I love dogs, but I will never keep one. But it's just that I do love dogs. I love my huskies, right? And but I would say that it's very important to understand that there are certain things that are allowed, certain things that are not allowed in Islam. But there's always debatable things. There are certain things in Islam which are just absolutely a no-go, right? Absolutely a no-go. So it happens. My niece, Allah bless her, she's fantastic at animation, right? She's a she does designs, you know, and she was doing that throughout high school, and she's gone to do game design or something like that now. And so this is her thing. She just loves to do that. So I think art is very important, but you know, you just have to be conscious of, okay, how can I do it in so a way that everyone can really accept it? But look, you're going to have naysayers in every community, and we've got our pious police with us as well, who for it doesn't matter what you do, you're never good enough. You're always doing bid'ah. You're always haram. You're always this. You're always that. That's with everyone. It doesn't mean that they don't speak for the religion. Just because you're the loudest person in the room doesn't mean you speak for the religion. So these people always exist. And so that's why I say that don't worry about what people say, just do the right thing and what's good for you and the society, with also understanding that there's always going to be positives and negatives everywhere. There's always going to be people that doubt because people don't know. You know, I'll give you a famous example is that, you know, one imam, the people saw him, they saw him go to the washroom and they saw him come out and he went straight to pray salah. And then after the salah, the person said, brothers, we all have to repeat, everyone, brothers, sisters, this man, he doesn't have wudu. You know, he doesn't have wudu. And he started looking at him, you know, imam looks at him, because all imams, and, you know, brother Bakr Hawari can tell, you know, as an imam, you know, you always get some funny comments, right? And I usually call them the khutbah after the khutbah. So when you give something a khutbah, after the khutbah, say, brother Sheikh, you know, wallahi, what you said was fantastic. That's how you know there's something coming. When they tell you, Sheikh, what you said was fantastic, that's how you know, oh my God, what did I do now? But you just, you get used to it. I don't say you get used to it, but you just learn to accept it, I suppose. So he said this thing, and this imam was like, he's looking at everyone and he's like, okay, hold on. Oh, what? He said, you don't have wudu. You went to the bathroom. You went to the washroom. And he's like, I just went to organize my clothes. That's what I just went there, just to organize my clothes. That's about it. And that was it. I just walked in and walked out. That's why I walked in and walked out. Hello, you know? So, and so the person completely misunderstood. So that's always going to happen. People are going to misunderstand what's something. And so, like you said, there is a certain facet of culture that, for them, language, you know, is art, it's philosophy, right? And we don't have that. And that's my number one struggle with Muslims in Melbourne, right? Is trying to bring them onto this level of society where they're able to communicate, you know, with artists and philosophers and thinkers, right? But it's not just Muslims in Melbourne. It's an Australian thing, you know. We were known for it in Australia 100 years ago. We were known for it as colonialists, you know. We were the loudest ones in the room, you know, barefoot, you know. It's very normal, you know. I grew up here in Australia. It's, you know, years ago before I was imam, very normal for me. You see me in my shorts, t-shirt, and, you know, go to Safeway, you know, barefoot or something, not even just wearing sandals. At summer, who wears sandals in summer in Australia? No one does, right? So that's how it is. That's how we are. We're Australians, right? We do things a little bit more differently.
I'm actually really glad you touched on a few things, including sort of the idea of nuance in Islamic tradition, but also Islamic art history, and also just how to handle criticism. That was, I think that's really valuable, and I think that would be really valuable for a younger me.
For all of us, sister.
Sheikh, you right from the beginning of this whole conversation have mentioned that, you know, advocacy is about going against the grain. You're perhaps preservation as well, which I completely agree with. You're preserving values, but at points you're challenging the status quo because you see it oppressing a certain part of society, or you know, challenging the way things are going. My question is, at the moment, a lot of my kind of social media spaces has heaps of conversations about cancel culture and advocacy in cancel culture. And I have a very love-hate relationship with it. I'm like, I understand it, but I also don't, because I think you have to invite people into a conversation. But I would love your thoughts on, like, you know, what are the best ways to call out things we see that are wrong, and just your insights on cancel culture and, I guess, and the teachings that we've had.
I think it's a very nuanced thing, and we're all really getting to know what cancel culture is. And you know, it's because it's only recently come up that we've become conscious of these things, right? I mean, Gone with the Wind is something that we all grew up with, but we weren't conscious about, you know, the racial undertones of it, right? We never understood how it meant for other people to feel that way, right? Very similarly to how us Muslims, we feel very, very sensitive about a lot of the stuff that comes out of Hollywood. Sometimes when they've got a Muslim guy, you know, the Muslim guy's always doing something. He's either got a really bad accent, you know, he's either really doing something funny, and Brother Bakr got a lovely podcast on that. There's, you know, just always, you know, people from, you know, different background or whatever. It's just something funny happening with them. And that's been a thing of most cultures, right? They always had something where they're making fun of someone, because it wasn't norm to make fun of your own culture. It's only really now we make fun of ourselves, right? We've learned to do that, right? Especially with stand-up comedy, right? And I think that's really great. I think any of your activists, go do some stand-up comedy, you'll enjoy it, right? And I think that's a nice way of activism, because I think at the moment, people trust comedians more than they trust politicians for some reason. I don't know why, but they just do, right? Everyone was just waiting for Dave Chappelle's 8 minutes. What was it? What did it call? 8 minutes, 10 seconds? Yeah, is that what it was called? 8 minutes, 10 seconds. Everyone was waiting for him to say something on that topic, and he did. And mashallah, wow, what he just said, you know, it was just something else, you know. It was a one time that I've never met a comedian that can get away with not being, and I actually knew Dave Chappelle, don't say knew Dave Chappelle, but I would say I knew the person who he learned the Quran with, and because he came and he traveled, I don't know if you heard about it, he traveled to South Africa. It's a very famous story. So where he was, I wasn't far from there, that masjid. And so we knew the people that dealt with him. And so he got, what helped him was he got very spiritual, and mashallah, he's like that until it's in his eyes. But I would recommend, in regards coming back to cancel culture, that look, we have to accept that history is very complicated. Okay, history is very complicated. Individuals it's complicated, and I said, okay, look, there's a reason why, you know, Josh Frydenberg, for instance, he jumped when he heard that, you know, the statue of Winston Churchill was being destroyed, right? And he jumped. Josh Frydenberg jumped, and he said, listen here, Winston Churchill, because he had that pain of the Holocaust, right? So he said, hold on, Winston Churchill was the first person in Europe to call out Hitler's Germany, right? He's the first person that said, we can't work with this guy. It's Chamberlain that said that we need Chamberlain was more of a appeasement movement, while Churchill was like, no way, this is not happening. And you have to understand, Churchill, he comes from like a long, you know, family history. He was related, you know, in a distant sense to the royal family, right? So he comes from that type of background. So he comes from old school England. And he was, you know, at the same time, he was very interesting. He was trailblazer. Even in his time, he was an activist trailblazer. So, you know, so when, you know, Josh Frydenberg said this, you know, people were like, hold on, but okay, yeah, but he's done all his other stuff as well. Does that make it right? You know, so like I said, it's complicated. And it's complicated. Not everyone from, you know, who's done something bad, said something, if you look back at it, okay, you know, so are you going to look down at the founding fathers of America because of certain aspects of their lives? So it's like you've got to learn that things are complicated, right? You can't really look at things in a very unilateral way, but cancel culture is important because it brings up that society is coming to the level now where it's getting very conscious about itself. And so when a person gets conscious, they get conscious. Like the first time they go to the masjid, they come back, they want to throw out the television. I said, hold on, wait, don't throw out the television. Don't go crazy. Don't go break your phone, go do this, go do that. Just relax, okay? Just relax. Go watch the ABC if you've got a problem, right? So that's what we tell people. But cancel culture is a sign, mashallah, that society is getting conscious. And I think we got to learn just to help channel it, that's all. I think we just got to learn to offer our opinions on it. That's all. I don't stop movements. I think, mashallah, each movement's got its own, mashallah, it will run its course, just like everything else.
Thank you, Sheikh. Some very good points, and lots of points we can even go on and discuss lots of other things. With that, we'd like to conclude. If Mahak or Alicia, have you guys got anything to say? Otherwise,
I'd like to share a really quick reflection. Actually, I'm so very grateful that I've been able to spend this hour listening to what you've had to share. I think my biggest takeaways are, you know, those moments in history that we can look back on and pride ourselves and say, actually, you know, it's part of our blood, our history. It's not this new thing that we have to learn. And I'm just really excited to now go and tell my family about the different hadiths you've shared. So thank you so much for sharing those with us.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm inspired. I would just like to say I'm inspired by you guys. MashaAllah, Sister Mehek, you had, MashaAllah, a good campaign. And it's, you know, Sister Alicia, MashaAllah, great to know you're in art and design and all of those things, and activism as well. And Brother Bakr, MashaAllah, I love his podcasts and his shows. So you guys inspire me, you know. So I grab inspiration from you people, man. So keep it up, please. Don't get old and tired with society, okay? Get old and still active with society, right? Because look, I will tell you guys one thing, man. You're gonna get wounds, right? You're gonna get wounds, and they are wounds of what you go through. That's why I say it's very important to be spiritually, you know, in touch, psychologically in touch, and you know, you will heal, you know, and you will grab energy, and you will all these things, and you know, you will, you know, it's a long conversation. I don't want to continue, but I'll just say that, mashallah, just continue, man. Mashallah, you guys are an inspiration. It's just, I'm so pleased to have people like you in the community, all of you.
Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you very much, Sheikh. And we are also, of course, inspired by you, and we learned from you. And it's been a great conversation. And hopefully, you know, it's a kickoff for many people to be advocates for more of the younger community to be involved with the imams. Jazakumullah khairan. I think if we haven't got anything else, we'll end with dua. If you can make some short dua for us, Jazakumullah khairan, and we'll end the night, inshallah.
جزاك الله خير. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم يا علي يا عظيم يا حليم يا عليم أنت ربي وعلمك حسبي فنعم الرب ربي ونعم الحسب حسبي تنصر من تشاء وأنت العزيز الرحيم. اللهم افتح لنا فإنك خير الفاتحين، واغفر لنا فإنك خير الغافرين، وارحمنا فإنك خير الراحمين. اللهم يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين ويا ذا القوة المتين ويا راحم المساكين يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت، وعافنا فيمن عافيت، وتولنا فيمن توليت، وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت، وقنا واصرف عنا شر ما قضيت. Oh Allah, we ask you, Ya Allah, please, Ya Allah, have mercy on our leaders here, Ya Allah, our activists, Ya Allah, have mercy on them, Ya Allah, you protect them, Ya Allah, you guide them, Ya Allah, you fill their hearts with nur, Ya Allah, and make it such that each and every single one of them, Ya Allah, can be a pillar of nur in this life and in the hereafter, Ya Allah, and accept all of our deeds, all our good deeds, Ya Allah, and put them, Ya Allah, in our scales on the good deeds, Ya Allah. Wa sallallahu ta'ala khayri khalqi Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikh. Thank you. Also, I extend the thanks to Sister Mihak and Sister Alicia, and of course the organizer, Sister Musarrat. And we'll end the night with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.